Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here today and talk about school-based disaster risk reduction and how XR can really help to address some of the shortcomings in that space. If you want to go ahead and pull up my slide deck, please. So I work with the Global Disaster Preparedness Center. We're an international Red Cross reference center focused exclusively on disaster preparedness. So we do a great deal of work, not only with Red Cross and Red Crescent national societies around the world to help to build their capacity in disaster preparedness for their communities, but also with disaster practitioners worldwide. Next slide, please. Last year, we conducted an extensive piece of research. Sorry, next slide. I already mentioned that one. Last year, we conducted an extensive piece of research really inspired by the last couple of years of me attending Games for Change. Actually, this is my third year. And the first couple of years, the things that I learned about and the people that I met and spoke with helped to inspire some of the work that we've been doing at the GDPC. So we've always been interested here at GDPC in looking at ways that innovative strategies and technical or technological solutions can help to support disaster preparedness activities worldwide. And we're really interested in looking more into the space of immersive technology in games. So we contracted a couple of research consultants last year to do this incredibly in-depth study on the potential for immersive technology for school-based disaster risk reduction and school preparedness. The consultancy resulted in a meta-analysis and extensive literature review. The report, which will be available to you online, is over 80 pages long and incredibly dense and very valuable. So I encourage you to look into that because I certainly won't be able to cover all of it in my talk today. And also resulted in a series of 10 case studies looking at specific technologies in the sector that are helping to bring expanded capacity into the disaster preparedness space. So the researchers conducted a number of interviews, analyzed the technologies themselves, and brought a great deal of their own expertise to the topic to put together this meta-analysis and these case studies. So I'm going to do a little bit of a review here on the considerations, the things that they found, the key learnings, some of the solutions that we think that XR might be able to provide in this space, and some recommendations for anyone who's interested in moving forward in that. Next slide, please. So for context, I want to talk about school-based disaster risk reduction. School-based disaster risk reduction has 3 different pillars. It's really a core part of our Red Cross, Red Crescent activities worldwide when it comes to disaster preparedness. It's part of the comprehensive school safety framework. The target audience for it runs the gamut from students to teachers to administrators of schools to parents to the broader communities that are served by those schools. The 3 different pillars address different areas of what's important in terms of school safety. The research that we talk about is mostly focused on pillars 2 and 3, which is looking both at the overall resilience of communities to disasters and also the disaster management within schools themselves. So safety within the schools, but also education about disaster resilience more broadly. So that's the space that we're looking at here. Next slide. I'll go through this one very quickly because I'm guessing that if you're attending this conference, you're already familiar with these terms, but just for context, these are the terms that we were using and the things that we were basing a lot of our research in. So looking at virtual reality experiences, augmented reality experiences, extended reality. So basically just looking at any kind of way that XR provides an immersive experience of some kind, whether that's through VR, AR, or some other mixed mechanism. Next slide. So some considerations, we're looking specifically at a youth audience and school-age children in particular. So health and safety, security, privacy, those kinds of things definitely need to be a priority in these conversations. So some of the things that we looked at were when we were sort of reviewing the beginning of this piece of research, was looking at recommendations from the manufacturers of headsets and other hardware pieces to determine when and how those pieces of equipment would be appropriate for different ages. Also grounding this sort of more broadly in cognitive development understanding on how kids' brains are developing and when they're able to, for example, view something and be able to discern whether or not it's a fantasy or a reality. There are a couple of key points in youth development where, you know, we want to be able to provide an educational experience, but we don't want to traumatize the children by showing them something that they're not able to understand as a fantasy. So being able to make these distinctions based on age groups helps us to understand which solutions, which technological solutions might be most appropriate for different age groups. It's also important to note that any of these pieces of technology for youth age groups should always be, those activities should always be supervised, either by parents or teachers. And there should be a dedicated onboarding time to help them understand how the technology works, what the experience will be like. And as always, moderation is really key when it comes to participating in these types of technologies, because we want to make sure that the youth are not being overwhelmed. We want to make sure that we're avoiding things like motion sickness, and then sort of just generally, you know, for their health, we want to make sure that the screen time isn't too overwhelming. Next slide. Great. So one of the core pieces of this research was looking at the limitations of traditional school-based disaster risk reductions and how XR might be able to provide some kind of opportunity to address those limitations. There are three different areas of this that we're focusing on. The first is disaster awareness raising activities, which I'll talk about here first. The second one is disaster drills and evacuation. And the third one is first aid and disaster management training. So the first one, disaster awareness raising activities. There are a couple of different areas here where there are gaps in the traditional school-based DRR activities that we might be able to see opportunities for XR to help address these gaps. So first, when it comes to participation and motivation, a lot of times the activities that students are participating in when it comes to understanding or when it comes to learning about the disasters and hazards that might impact them and their communities, they're really sort of passive learners, and it's not something that's terribly engaging. You know, a lot of the information is being pushed at the students, and there isn't a whole lot of participatory opportunities for the students to be able to really engage with it. There's also a certain amount of lack of realism, lack of real, being able to understand the actual risk based on where you live and the environment that you're in. So it's very difficult for students to sort of take an abstract concept like, you know, a hurricane and, you know, a certain mile-an-hour winds and, you know, certain feet of storm surge, and be able to really understand how that would impact them and their homes and their community. So they can hear those words, they can sort of digest them, but it's difficult for them to really internalize what that would be like and what kind of risk that actually entails for them. So there are a lot of opportunities here for XR to increase engagement and motivation. You know, especially we're looking at a global audience here at GDPC, and in a lot of places that we're working, XR is an incredible novelty. So, you know, being able to participate in something that's cool and interesting and new is definitely a motivating factor. But on top of that, it's been shown in multiple studies that engaging with VR can actually result in behavior change. Things that have been shared at Games for Change festivals in years past. have spoken about that very issue, and has the power to impact the decision making that students will make in a real world scenario. The integration of gaming into different XR opportunities also helps students to learn by doing instead of just being passive recipients of information. And of course, being able to be in an immersive space allows for improved visualization to help students understand the hazards more deeply and be able to make decisions based on a more realistic scenario. Next slide. So the second piece here, and a second gap in SBDRR, comes with disaster drills and evacuations. There are a number of limitations here. A lot of them have to do with logistics. Being able to, organize a group of students to do a fire drill evacuation, for example, takes time away from the classroom. Usually a lot of logistics. There's you have to have a fire department on hand. You have to sort of plan the time, turn the fire drill, turn the fire bell on. Everyone has to file out. It's disruptive to the classroom learning process. It's disruptive to the day, and there are a lot of logistics involved in doing that kind of drill. So being able to do a simulation, XR provides the opportunity to be able to do simulated activities where students could actually visualize, for example, their classroom or their school and be able to see smoke and understand that they need to crawl underneath the smoke, or if there's a fire down this corridor, they need to turn this way. So there are different opportunities that XR provides that both enhance that opportunity or enhance that realism, but also require significantly less in terms of logistics. Additionally, we talked about decision-making skills. XR is able to enhance the opportunity for students to learn more from disaster drill type scenarios, and they can learn, in a more realistic scenario, what they're supposed to do before, during, and after a disaster. One thing that's interesting to note here is that when we're talking about different types of disasters, those are going to vary greatly in terms of which locations have are exposed to which different hazards, and XR does a better job with some of those types of hazards than others. So for now, it does a great job with things like flooding, the visualization of smoke, for example, but earthquakes are a little bit more difficult to simulate. So making sure that the technology is appropriate for the type of hazard that we're teaching about, I think, is a key consideration. Next slide. And the third piece here, the third gap, is about training, primarily when it comes to first aid and disaster management. So, first aid training, I don't think is necessarily, and this comes from a lifelong Red Crosser, first aid training is not necessarily something that anybody finds exciting, but it's sort of a necessary skill to learn. But students are often not engaged with the content. There isn't always a great deal of hands-on learning. So being able to be in a more immersive space where students can assess a situation, visualize an injury, and be able to physically address those first aid emergencies, it provides a great deal of opportunity for them to increase their learning outcomes, be more engaged with it, and help to better understand how to put the learnings from those courses into practice. Next slide. I'm going to go through these next series of slides relatively quickly because, again, I'm trying to distill an 80-page piece of research into a relatively short presentation. So I want to address a couple of key learnings here on the next slide, looking at the research, things that we've learned from the case studies and from the meta-analysis. And some of these are going to be like preaching to the choir. I know a lot of you do these things already. But for anyone who's in the disaster preparedness space who might be thinking about integrating an XR technology within that space, these things, it's better to state them than to leave them out. So starting with learning outcomes first, and then finding the appropriate technology to meet those needs. So It's always better to have the learning outcomes and the needs of the educational system to lead that process rather than having the technology lead that process. It's also really crucial to have students involved from the beginning if possible. Participatory design is really critical to making sure that it's going to be relevant and interesting and useful to the students. From our perspective, again, looking at a global landscape, we want any solution to be able to be customized and relevant to the specific local and national context, especially if you're looking at something that needs to be scalable. So we would be looking potentially at something that we would want to scale to multiple different countries, different Red Cross and Red Crescent national societies. So being able to include nuance and customization and scalability, I think, is really key. We want to be able to balance a realistic hazard representation with a proactive solution. So, it might actually be more beneficial for students to see a more, a less realistic simulation that's, in the right space, but not necessarily, something that's more cartoony and a little bit less super hyper realistic, in order for them to both understand it but not be overwhelmed by it. I already mentioned a little bit about design differences when it comes to things like flood, hurricanes, fire. We want to make sure that the content is really simple and focused. We want to make sure that it provides really key technical experiences for the users, especially when it comes to minimizing the opportunity, or the possibility rather, for things like motion sickness. That's something, especially for kids, that we want to be really conscious of. One of the most important things, and I will hammer this into anybody who we're working with in the field, is integrating this into a broader learning experience. The XR solution cannot be a standalone solution. It needs SBDRR intervention that works with what teachers are doing, what students are doing, more analog pieces of the curriculum. We should focus the XR in places where it can really make a difference, and have it be complementary and supplementary, and not, designed to be the single solution to solve all the problems in SBDRR. And another key piece is sharing knowledge across the sector. As we were doing this research, we found all of these case studies, and none of them had really heard of each other. But a lot of them were trying to solve very similar problems in different contexts with different variations on the same types of technology. So one of the things that is really key is sharing the knowledge and learning and collaboration across the sector. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to super fast run through these last 3 slides just to show you the types of solutions that we recommend. Virtual simulations, something that I've sort of been addressing a little bit, but simulations can potentially be expensive, but we want to be able to provide a situation where students can really see what they might be facing. So something where they could actually see a disaster happening helps them to work through not only understanding the problem, but being able to make decisions within that space and act in a high pressure situation. Next slide. The second one is really honing in on location-based experiences. So overlaying content within the physical space where the students are. This is a horrifying video. I'm not going to show the video, but it could be pretty challenging. This is an image of a student sitting in a classroom, and you can actually see floodwaters rising and see how that would impact relatively, young students with that level of floodwater. So, but having a location-based experience really helps students to be able to understand how those hazards might have a real impact in their own space. Next slide. All right, and then the third one is the gamification aspect of it. So being able to take an immersive technology and encourage decision-making and understanding of content through gamification of it. And I won't dwell too long on that because we have a couple of days here to talk more about gamification. And then finally, the next slide, I'll wrap up here. with some key recommendations. And I encourage you to read the full report because we go into these in a great deal more detail and more time than I have to share with you here today. But these are our key recommendations for anyone who's interested in using XR in a disaster preparedness, particularly school-based disaster risk reduction context, taking into account the context that the students are working in, making sure that it's led by the needs of the students and the learning outcomes rather than being led by technology, and making sure that everything is age appropriate and safe for the students. And I will wrap up there, but I encourage anyone to reach out to me separately. I'd be happy to continue this conversation. We're also looking forward to potentially collaborating with anyone on our next steps. We're going to be working on a needs assessment with our Red Cross, Red Crescent partners around the world to look at what types of solution we might be wanting to develop, and we'll be looking for partners to help to develop in that space. So I encourage you to reach out to me with questions or if you'd be interested in collaborating. Thanks so much.